Thank you everyone for joining. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Good evening or good morning, depending where in the world you are. Today we mark a historic day. 25 years ago, Jaswant Singh Khalra was disappeared. The champion of Punjab's disappeared. We're gathered together and we started this evening in the best possible way, connecting with Guru Shabad. And thank you to both the Jathas that brought us beautiful Gurbani to our homes. And then we listened to Jaswant Singh Khalra's speech, one of his last public speeches right before his own disappearance, which is, again, every time we hear it, it's remarkable. It speaks both to his vision and to his revolutionary work. And it sadly also speaks to the institutionalized impunity and how the progress for the thousands of disappeared in Punjab has been painfully slow or has been entirely absent even. So it is my pleasure to be introducing this panel, this final panel of the Khalra Week commemorating 25 years since Jaswant Singh Khalra's disappearance, because these panelists have done that slow, that hard, that painful work to bring some closure and some justice to the families of disappeared in Punjab. And I have to say, on a personal note, this week has been very emotional. It's something different when we're isolated in our own homes, trying to connect over a collective memory, trauma, tragedy, and also inspiration. So there have been a lot of events this week put together entirely by volunteers. And thanks a lot to the Khalra Mission Organization for doing this, putting together these creative and these important programs throughout the week. And it's listening to the speech right now, it reminds us, ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਲੈਣਾ ਹੀ ਨਾ ਸਿੱਖੋ, like a man who had a price on his head and who was a few months later killed is standing in front of a sangat in that chardi kala, talking about insani haq, talking about manukhi haq, talking about human rights, and talking about what each of us can give. So this has been a really amazingly inspiring week, sometimes heavy, but really inspiring. And now I want to turn to the folks who have helped keep the Khalra flame alive. They are the mighty human rights defenders of Punjab, and they're the ones who've helped us still hold on to this idea that an Ankila Punjab, a proud and a just Punjab, is still something that we should hold as our vision. So I'm going to turn to the panelists because that's why you're all here today. Rajvinder Singh Bains, who's joining us from Chandigarh, senior advocate, Punjab and Haryana High Court. And he has been the Khalra lawyer since day one. And he has that insight and also has been the persistent lawyer for so many other cases, much less profile cases, unsung cases. And he has been the hope for many, many families that have steadily been institutionally been asked to lose hope in Punjab. So it's an absolute honor to have him here today. Satnam Singh Bains is trained as a barrister in the United Kingdom. He's one of the founding forces behind the Punjab Documentation and Advocacy Project, an organization that I have to say has very humbly, without much fanfare, but with a lot of steadfast commitment, done what really matters. And we got the good fortune of getting a glimpse into their work last night, or again, depending on your time zones, yesterday. And again, it's just so inspiring that they've connected with the folks who truly matter, with the survivor families. So you might not see them as much on social media because they're actually in places where it matters. And then I have to say that Paramjit Kaur Khalra is here in spirit today, the gentle, fearless warrior of Punjab, who's the spoken sister of so many families of the disappeared in Punjab. She's doing what she does best, holding fort in the home in Kabir Park that has come to symbolize that open home of hope and of sunwai and of solidarity for so many families. So she's there in Kabir Park in Amritsar, joining a small but mighty Barsi commemoration today. And every year, it's always there's a lot of asks of her to come and again speak about the force that she has been behind the Khalra case. And that same kind of ask is often extended to her children, and Navkiran Kaur Khalra, Jaswant Singh and Paramjit Kaur's firstborn. Navkiran Kaur is the third panelist with us today. Anyone who knows Navkiran knows that her papa would be extremely proud of her. So I just want to say that Navkiran brings so much humility, brilliance, and emotion to the work that she does with families, for families, and it's an honor for a lot of us to call her our sister and friend. My name is Mallika Kaur, and I'll be moderating this panel. So I'm going to start in order of seniority. So I'm going to start with Mr. Bains because, you know, the way human nature, not just our community, I think the way human nature works is we get so caught up in our contemporary events. Like ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੀ history ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਬੈਠੇ ਹਾਂ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇੰਜ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸੀ, ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸੀ, ਹੋਇਆ ਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ. So with a 2020 vision from sitting in 2020, we do that, right? But I would, if you could, Bansab, please take us back to 94, 95, because you were doing part of doing with Punjab Human Rights Organization, with your father, Justice Ajit Singh Bains, and with your own growing human rights practice, you were doing human rights work in Punjab at that time for a number of years. Can you take us back to and remember and share when Jaswant Singh Khalra's extraordinary disclosure of the mass and secret cremations, when you first heard about that, what it mattered, why it was important?
Thank you, Mallika. See, I came to meet Jaswant Singh way back in 1990, 1991. But I came close to him when he participated in the election, by-election of my father in April or May 1993. In fact, he participated for 1 month and I was with him, and that's how we came close. And there in that campaign, he had his own audio cassettes prepared. And I remember a few words also that you must vote for Ajit Singh Bains because उन्होंने तशद्दद अपने जिस्म ते सहारे ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਦਿਓ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ੁਲਮ ਖਤਮ ਹੋਏ ਤੇ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਇਲੈਕਟ ਕਰੋ ਤੇ he wholeheartedly had beautiful gift of speech and ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੈਸੇਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੰਡਦੇ ਸੀ and that's how we came close. And thereafter, almost whenever he will come to Chandigarh, he will come to my office and together, and usually he'll always have some victim or the other person whose cases are to be filed. Though in those days, the habeas corpus petition used to be dismissed summarily, but we were carrying on, he was carrying on that at least it creates a record that there were persons who filed, there were persons who had the stories to tell. And with that object only, we used to file petition in the High Court, though we never used to get the relief. The relief started coming only after Jaswant Singh Khalra himself disappeared. So those were the days when you had no hope from Punjab and Haryana High Court. I mean, no court system was functioning below the High Court. And the only effective instrument was Supreme Court. And that is how when finally the dangerous day arrived when Mr. Jaswant Singh Khalra himself was abducted, we had to approach directly the Supreme Court and we did not go to the High Court. That is how in those days, that was the time when Ram Narayan Kumar was also documenting disappearances cases, which finally came in 2 volumes reduced to ashes. So along with that, but the whole object at that time was either my father or General Narinder Singh or Colonel Pratap Singh or Baljeet Gill, that at least keep talking, keep protesting so that people do not lose hope at all. So wherever, even in those days when people were disappearing and these people were all former, somewhat protected, and therefore they will go to each victim family wherever there was major encounter or fake encounter. And that is how those were the times. And I was a young lawyer and in fact I was doing secretarial work. And therefore periodically we used to meet and carry on whatever little we could. We really could not do much. In fact, all kind of the momentum to the movement came with the investigation of Jaspal Singh and Jaswant Singh when he released. Because this was always a question, where are people going? Where are people disappearing? Where do they take the abducted person and young men? Of course, we knew they're tortured, but where do they actually end up? Because bodies are never given. That is how when the first breakthrough came, it was like a bombshell. And that actually jolted the establishment also, but jolted the people also. And because it resolved a long-held mystery, just like in Kashmir, they used to put mass graves. Similarly, in Punjab, the cremation was one of the end to dead bodies whom they used to abduct. And that is how other bodies are used to be thrown in rivers. So this was the time, and when we came to know, and we had not at that time foreseen that Jaswant Singh himself will become the victim of the same process.
Thank you. And thanks for describing that whole jolting the system effect of his discovery. Navkiran, I'm going to turn to you. You were in school, you were 10 years old in 1995, but just a year before his disappearance is really when the discovery or the exposure or the expose of the mass cremations had happened, and he travels abroad twice, your father does. Can you share with us any memories you have of that time, again going back in time as a child, of when he was doing this work?
I think honestly, we have very few memories of him because he was mostly traveling, and he was in England for more than a year in 91. But few of the things that were pretty dominant was like he was a very observant person. So wherever he would go, he would definitely not speak up his mind immediately. He would observe people, he would observe organizations, and then eventually build up his opinion about them, and would eventually open up with them. In terms of family, he was a responsible brother, he was a responsible father and son-in-law. If he is in the area where any of his relatives would live, no matter how busy he is, he would take out some time to just go say hi, that I was in this area. So those are the things that he would do with the family. But the few other things that we see is like ਜਿਹੜੀ ਦੂਰ ਅੰਦੇਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਾਂ he knew what he was doing and what he was getting onto, especially after coming back from England. Like ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਈਡੀਆ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਰਾਹ ਤੇ ਤੁਰਨਾ ਹੈ. ਸੋ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲਾਸਟ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਦਰ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ, ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੰਨਾ ਹੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਤੂੰ ਬੱਚੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਾ ਲੇਂਗੀ. ਸੋ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਮੀਡੀਏਟ ਰਿਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਮੇਰੀ ਮਦਰ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਇਹੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਅੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਹੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣੀ ਆ. So she didn't realize what he's talking about, but he had something deeper in what he was thinking. ਤੇ similarly ਮੇਰੇ ਦਾਦਾ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਆਖਰੀ ਵਾਰ 2-3 ਸਤੰਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣ ਗਏ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਬਾਪੂ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਉਮਰੇ ਵੀ ਕੋਟਾ ਕਚਹਿਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਸਟੇਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਧੱਕੇ ਖਵਾਏਂਗਾ. And then he was like ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹੂਗਾ. And similar, he also said that to my mom, ਕਿ ਤੇਰੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਹੱਥ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਾਊਗਾ. And that's kind of true. Like we went through the entire trial, ਕੋਈ security ਨਹੀਂ ਲਈ, same schools ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ, ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਉਵੇਂ ਹੀ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ, ਪਰ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਕੋਈ physical threat ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਈ. ਤੇ ਨਾ ਹੀ ਬਾਪੂ ਜੀ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਮਾਂ ਜੀ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਦੋਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਨਾ ਹੀ he knew ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਣਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਕੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ. And he also knew ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਦਾ impact ਕਿੰਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਡੇਟਾ ਹੈ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਏ. So he was very well planned for this project which came to his hand.
Yeah, thank you, Navkiran. Thank you for highlighting the, again, koi security nahi liti, and even what you're mentioning, jadon bahar gaye, there's already an audience question about how did foreign governments respond. And we know that he was offered political asylum, his family, he was asked to talk to his family about that. Bains Sahab, Justice Ajit Singh Bains remembers that story about kuch din pehle, even before he was picked up, he had come to Chandigarh and he was asked ke High Court, let's file that petition, security, he's getting death threats, and he refuses all of that in the steadfast commitment that I'm doing the right thing and I'm standing with the victim families and I'm fearless, basically. So that's exceptional. Navkiran, anything else just in response to this audience question, how foreign, and this is of course not maybe as a kid, but now what you know, how foreign governments and how Sikh diaspora responded when he traveled and he was making the kinds of speeches we just heard from Dixie Gurdwara?
I think when he traveled to Canada, that's the most interaction ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। WSO ਦਾ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਸੀਗਾ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਅਟੈਂਡ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਜੂਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟਰੀ ਡਿਨਰ। that was his last time that he could interact, and we all heard his Dixie Gurdwara speech, which is kind of like, we got that cassette, the VCR cassettes through WSO like maybe a month or 2 months after his abduction, and that's the first time we watched it, like what he did in Canada. We didn't knew what he did, like what he spoke over there. And a few of his friends who were at our house and who watched it, and they just said ki eta oh apni wasiyat kar gaya. So that's what normally now people say about him, but that's the first reaction when we saw the video and the VCR cassette that came to us. So us to baad main kahungi ki, like, personally the family has no shikwa ya regret kisi bhi tarah da. Like, we have gotten tremendous support from the diaspora, from Sikh community, Punjabi community in Punjab, outside Punjab, and even non Sikh community who were aware of the human rights abuses that were going on in Punjab us vele te ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕਿ ਮੋਰਲ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਗਾਈਡੈਂਸ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਥਰੂ ਦੈਟ ਓਨਲੀ ਵੀ ਵਰ ਏਬਲ ਟੂ ਪਰਸੂ ਦਿਸ ਕੇਸ, ਐਂਡ ਜਿੱਥੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵ ਐਫਰਟ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕੌਮੀ ਐਫਰਟ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ।
Yeah, Mr. Bains, Rajvinder Bains, I'm going to turn back to you for a second, or for a few minutes. With all this support, right? The trial starts back in 1995. Mrs. Khalra, she started, it took every minute and every day of those 16 years, consumed her, even though she started from minute one. With all this support, at least in 95, Jadon trial shuru in 95, 96, how hopeful were you? Okay, this would be a different trial. Okay, maybe we get justice somehow faster or in a more complete way than what actually happened.
I was personally not very hopeful. I was following Kuljit Singh third trial. He was an equally important person. He was abducted in 89, and till 95, till Jaswant Singh Khalra himself was abducted, there was not even a first information report recorded by the police, even though we were in the Supreme Court. But somehow, I mean, it's God's grace that in this particular case, Jaswant Singh Khalra case, the Supreme Court moved very fast. Within 2 months, directed the CBI to please investigate and find out his whereabouts. And it took less than 11 months for the CBI to present and complete the investigation and present the final report, which means the trial started after the final report. But what was lacking there was that they had not found any evidence of murder. They had not found any evidence. They were only making a case of abduction. And then it took next 7-8 years to actually find the witness, the crucial witness who would prove that in fact he was killed in custody, the Kuldeep Singh. And then the CBI gave a report that he is not a reliable witness, that he is telling lies. And then it ultimately, till 2004, see the charge sheet is in 1997, till 2004, we were wrangling with procedural problem. All kind of objections were raised that the complainant counsel cannot appear, cannot argue for the court, and Kuldeep Singh cannot be made a witness. Finally, the court made him a court witness. And then trial started, and first witness statement was recorded way back in 2004, after 7 years. So though initially we were very hopeful that the trial, this case is going fast, but it turned to be like any other trial. It took, as you see, thereafter only in 2005, after the High Court intervened, that you complete the trial within 6 months, then only it finally ended in 2005. And there, of course, thereafter it followed fast. In 2 years, the High Court enhanced the sentences, and another 5 years, ultimately the Supreme Court at least confirmed 5 life imprisonment to 5 cops, and 2 escaped. So that way, it turned out to be well. I mean, that is the speed in Punjab. For any case to conclude, it takes a decade or more than that. Less than that is unthinkable.
Yeah, I was just going to say, spoken like a true litigator in Punjab, and especially the Tat case, which you mentioned, Geeta, you've been the lawyer on that, one of the first, perhaps the first enforced disappearance case that saw litigation. And none of this seems fast by any standards of due process, rule of law, and human rights, when it's something that was so blatant, right, in the news, so blatant, and yet, yes, like you said, it's in that context, getting it to just begin to move first took the energy, and then it took its course, as it often does. I'm going to turn to Satnam Bains to ask, you were living in the UK during this time, during Khalra Sab's, both as the trial starts, but then the trial lasts a lot of years. But I do want to ask you, just from your vantage point of somebody who now is building on your own documentation work through PDAP, and is building on this idea. It was very interesting listening to you yesterday also, Satnam, because idea, it's so prevalent and lazy perhaps, koi record hai nahi hai ji. Like people just assume, okay, there must not be anything. And you've done that painstaking work now of collecting records. And it's even more amazing that Khalra Sahib did this work without technology, without a huge team, without even RTIs and other laws, perhaps, to support him. So thinking about what he did in 1995, can you speak a little bit to why it was so foundational for human rights work in Punjab and really in the subcontinent?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is you've heard Bains Sahib and Banji Navkiran Kaur really give you such incredible history. I mean, if they were to write, and often when I've met Bains Sahib and discussed, what's happened in Punjab, and the one remarkable thing about him is he's an extremely busy lawyer, but his door is always open. And in fact, in the years that I've met and dealt with him, I don't think I've ever come across a case where Bains Sahib hasn't patiently listened and taken it up. And it's completely exceptional that somebody has dedicated so much of their life. And just going further back, I mean, I learn something new every day, and just hearing about Justice Ajit Singh Bains's election, campaign, and the fact that Justice Ajit Singh Bains, a retired Punjab and Haryana High Court judge, as many people know, was arrested and detained under TADA. So, for us, when we first started looking at this way back, well, I mean, relatively speaking, it's not that far back. It's been about 12, 13 years. These people were such inspirational figures. इन्होंने ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੈ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਦੀ ਛੱਡੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਾਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ, and despite painful progress that's made, because of their efforts that some of these officers were actually convicted in the Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra case. And in fact, some people often say, what's the point of doing these cases? ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਇਹ ਚੋਂ ਮਿਲਣਾ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਉਧਰਲੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਚ ਕੋਈ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣਾ. And my simple answer to that is, all of these efforts and all these things that have been going on for so many years, they correct the historical wrongs, in fact, and they completely changed the narrative. KPS Gill had famously said in 1995, these thousands of young Naujawan that Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra had said had found their fate in cremation grounds. He said maybe they're Bihari migrants, or they are people that die on a daily basis. Now, it took 17 years of litigation, as Bains Sahib will know, when the Jaswant Singh Khalra CBI investigation was ordered. The NHRC was tasked with this job to identify these 2,000 cremations that took place in Patti, Tarantara and Dargana Mandir. And one of the first tasks that we did was to really just follow their footsteps to see what had happened in that litigation. And it's right to say that over 1,500 people, so I think the final figure was 1,535 people were identified from 2,097 cremations. Not a single case says that the person was a Bihari migrant, was somebody who died because of natural causes. And in fact, everything that Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra had said and had exposed has in its own way been sort of proven now through those years of litigation. The second important thing is, the story of what happened to Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra, has been told 3 different times now. First is the trial court judgment, Then the accused police officers went to the High Court. Their sentences were increased, and then ultimately the matter ended up in the Supreme Court. And if you look at the narrative that's given by each of the courts, and these are, Indian courts, they all confirmed that there was nothing that could be impugned on Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra's character. He was a human rights activist. He was fearless. He exposed this practice. So the prevailing narrative had always been that human rights activists were somehow, masquerading as militants. And in fact, if you look at some of the, the media reportage at the time, that these are the overground face of the underground movement, and KPS Gill had already created this, atmosphere of fear. So, I mean, this extraordinary, remarkable thing that Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra had done, one thing I would say, what he had done in the space of less than a year, I don't think any organization has been able to do in decades. And that's our, organization included. I mean, he understood what had happened to these people. And what we've got to remember is this is, years before India had introduced the Right to Information Act. Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra understood the power of this information and how powerful the truth was. I mean, we've seen now, I mentioned this in the interview before, that, when WikiLeaks came out with their disclosures, the world turned upside down, that these were governments that were killing their own citizens, and these cables were released, and it was such a big thing. I mean, Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra was ahead of his time by, 2 decades. He understood the power of information, how to use that information to show that it's proven, it's documented, it's systematic, how the Punjab police take dead bodies, they claim, the provisions for unclaimed, unidentified persons. It was firewood registers, jehड़ा kapda लाश दे उत्ते पाउंदे आ कफन जिन्हों कहा जांदा, ओहदा हिसाब किद्दां रखिया जांदा. The fact that he was able to identify and build up this case, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. It's never been done anywhere. Forget India. I don't think in any conflict zone in Southeast Asia. And what makes his work even more remarkable is ਉਸ time ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੌਜੂਦੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਾਤਲ, whose names have now been proven, Ajit Singh Sandhu, KPS Gill was still the DGP, to openly challenge these people when they were at their height of power is just remarkable. And, as Banji was saying, her father knew what he was doing. This wasn't sort of accidental. If you look at, the Khalra case papers, there's so many people, Gurjara Singh Tora, who was the SGPC head at that time, all their statements are littered with, ਅਸੀਂ ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਰਾਏ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਚੋਂ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਓ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜਾਨ ਖਤਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ. He traveled the entire, he went to the UK, he went to Canada, and knowing that he was in such great danger on his return, he still pursued this, is just, mind-blowing, frankly. That for us, when we first said it took many years to actually understand, and in fact, when we watch the speech over and over again, I think you really appreciate it over time, what he was trying to do. And the fact that his work was cut short in these tragic circumstances is a real tragedy for the people of Punjab. And it was a real tragedy for the Sikh community. But, if these efforts can still produce some results, and one of the results may just be this, that, you're correcting the narrative that these people weren't terrorists and militants. The explanations that were given by the police officers in these FIRs has now been proven to be false. There were a number of cases that the CBI did prosecute where charge sheets were filed. Bansab is very familiar with these cases because a stay was imposed for so many years. One of the efforts was to get the stay vacated, and in 2017, due to Bansab's efforts in the High Court, the stay was vacated. in half of those 44 cases. So what we then decided to do was to pursue these cases that the CBI had investigated and ensure that at least something is done, where the CBI has filed a charge sheet to say these people were killed in cold blood, they were tortured, their family members were extorted, they were tortured themselves. And again, a continuation of that painful process was to make sure that these witnesses could come to court and they could depose. And the one thing that's really come out from these CBI cases is, and what I've understood, is why they are so desperate to make sure that the trial courts don't function. Because ultimately, when these cases do go to court, if witnesses do depose in a fearless way, it does result in convictions. And in the first 4 of these CBI cases, we've seen convictions. We may not be happy with the sentences, for example. As Bains was rightly saying, it's incredibly difficult to prove murder, which is why what happened in Baijaswant Singh Khalra's legal case was so remarkable, that evidence was collated. There was eyewitness evidence as to his killing. But in the majority of these cases, the reasons why the Punjab police acted in the way that they did is because even if you did bring or file a charge sheet without a dead body, without physical direct evidence of somebody being murdered, it's incredibly difficult. We've heard now in the media with the Sani trial that's going on that there's 1 or 2 police officers who have become approvers. So these, if the reports are correct, that these officers are now saying that we're giving the insider knowledge. But in the absence of that, it can be, extremely difficult. And the final thing I would like to say is, Baijaswant Singh Khalra's Qurbani and his Shahadat, I mean, it's immortalized. It can't be put into words. But the struggle of Bibi Paramjit Kaur Khalra, I mean, is equally amazing. When I met Bibi Ji so many years ago, that fire, that determination, as you rightly described, Mallika, Kabir Park is this open house, where victim families will come. She's really been the anchor. And I think the remarkable part of her story is when many people in the late 80s and the early 90s were fleeing Punjab and they were getting asylum in foreign countries, people were saying to Bibi Paramjit Kaur Khalra, "Twanu vi khatara ho sakda, kuch bhi ho sakda." In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the Baijaswant Singh Khalra case, there were attempts to file FIRs against her. Every single underhand tactic that could be used was used and thrown at her. But on Madan ni chhadya, she never gave up the struggle. She could have taken a much easier option and taken her 2 young children, Panji Navkiran and Paji Janmeet, abroad. And she didn't. And the fact that this brave, fearless woman who has the same spirit and determination as her husband, I think we're blessed actually to have somebody like her. When she stood for the election, I think it was last year or the year before, from Khadur Sahib, I mean, just listening to her speeches, I mean, she wasn't talking about basically ਪਿੰਡ ਦੀਆਂ ਨਾਲੀਆਂ ਗਲੀਆਂ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ development ਇੱਥੇ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ. She spoke on one platform, that is that the people of Khadur Sahib, Taran Taran, these affected areas, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਸਾਫ਼ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. And for her, it wasn't about becoming an MP or winning an election. 200,000 people voted for her. And this is all of the political parties of Punjab, including the Aam Aadmi Party, coming together and standing against her. And the fact that, even this, it's a recent sort of phenomena, that 200,000 people voted for her on her one issue, that ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਕੇ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਆ, they're still suffering, they're still looking for answers, and ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਿੱਤਾ to give her so many votes. I mean, it's just a remarkable thing. A lot of people have given up over the years. A lot of people have become depressed and despondent. We've spoken to all sorts of people that were involved in the human rights movement. Some of them were encouraging. Some of them said, look, you're wasting your time. Jo bhi ho gaya, sanu nahi lagda be, twana koi gal vi karooga, or they'll share their experiences. So it was heartening to see that not only is the activism really alive amongst the activists, but lokan ch bhi oh jazba hega. And sometimes we've come across a lot of people who are in their late 80s now. Be bapu ji, mata ji, tusi ki chaਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ? And ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਇਹ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਬੇ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲੇ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਮਿਲੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਕਟਹਿਰੇ 'ਚ ਖੜਾ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨੂੰ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਪਛਾਣ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤਾਂ ਅੱਖ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਖ ਮਿਲਾ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਬੇ ਤੈਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਮਾਰਿਆ, ਤੈਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨੂੰ ਚੁੱਕ ਕੇ ਇਹ ਕੀਤਾ। And just to be even a part of that, a small, very small part of that process, it gives some sense of fulfillment, that even helping or facilitating these really old witnesses, elderly witnesses to come, and just to see even in 2020 the kind of games that these accused lawyers will play, somebody turning up to court and then adjournment still being granted. We turned up in one case on the final day. In fact, Bains Sahib in the usual style, will sit at a very early hour in the morning. We'd finalize the arguments. We were ready for the final arguments in a 26-year case, only to be told, Bains Sahib wo ta stay lege High Court to. And we're supposed to just sit there and smile at this judge to say, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਨਾਲ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ 26 ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਐਵੀਡੈਂਸ ਵੀ ਸੁਣ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ, ਆਰਗੂਮੈਂਟਸ ਵੀ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਮਾਤਾ ਜੀ ਵੀ ਆ ਗਏ, and now we've been told on the morning that the accused lawyers have managed to secure another stay in the High Court. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, but it happens. And the fact that, the determination and, these sorts of things never, affect Bains Sahib and these other lawyers in the High Court, I find it, again, it requires so much patience and so much determination to be doing this now for 35 years. Kuljit Singh Dutt's case is still pending. Other cases are still pending. And to still have that determination, our view was whatever assistance, we can give if we can file new cases. So this 8,257 case, was to say that, look, there has to be accountability, and it's not the complete number, it's not the final number, but it's still a process that needs to be gone through, because these people kide gaye nahi. And ਘੱਟੋ ਘੱਟ ਜੇ ਭਾਈ ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਾਲੜੇ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਸਵਾਲ ਉਠਾਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ 26 years ago, ਘੱਟੋ ਘੱਟ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ death certificate ਮਿਲਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ, then that's the prayer. You were born on this earth in India, and ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜਨਮ ਦਾ certificate ਮਿਲਿਆ, birth certificate ਮਿਲਿਆ, ਪਰ ਜੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਗਾਇਬ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਜਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ the one right that even a dead person has and a dead body has is, where's the right to my death certificate? So it's an incredible state of affairs, but it's something that we shouldn't just let go of. Any community that's suffered from these mass state crimes, genocide, and the systematic killing of so many people wouldn't just let the issue go. And I'm confident that even when we've come and passed, there will be a new generation that will still pursue this, because it's so huge and heinous. It can never be forgotten, and neither should it be.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm so glad you've mentioned and it's so eloquently explained how the process is made part of the punishment, and how, as while people are dealing with this completely indescribable loss of a family member being yanked and taken away from their life forever with no closure, they're also dealing with in the courts stay on stay, vakil bamar ho gaya, chutti aa gayi, ye ho gaya, right? And I think it's really easy now to summarize and say, 16 years in the court, 5 junior policemen sentenced, like in the Khalra case, okay, the Supreme Court closes the case in 2011. But I do want to turn back to Bains Sahib, to Rajvinder Bains, and ask, this case saw there's so much that happened. There's a suicide by the policeman's immediate superior, Ajit Singh Sandhu. We have intimidation and false charges against Paranjit Kaur Khalra. There are death threats, spurious legal cases against key witnesses. There are conspiracies to conceal their people within the team of supposed supporters to Mrs. Khalra, who later turn out to be perhaps always had been plants or whatever else. And this is beyond conspiracy theories. These were things that you uncovered as the case was going on. Can you speak a little bit to some of those stories, those things that are just, we cannot summarize when we give a simple legal summary, some of those inside stories of what made this litigation and the work of the litigant and the lawyer so very difficult through those 16 years?
Still, the work is still not finished. The cases which Jaswant Singh investigated 2097, those trials are still pending after so long. Those people disappeared between 1984 to 1994. So those cases are still pending. Witnesses are still willing to depose. So the work is ongoing. But the Khalra trial itself is like a, I would say, took such unexpected turns. It was a case of abduction. Suddenly a witness appears. I have seen the murder. We did not believe him in the beginning, but finally he was a true witness. And miraculously, he was granted the CRPF Central Reserve Police Force security that he could survive the trial. Otherwise, he would have been killed much earlier. And then, as we see with the hindsight, that it was quite a planned, perfect crime. You see, the SSP planned it. He deputed 2 DSPs and 4 station house officers and 2 other officers. That means 9 officers team was constituted. And each one of them had created a kind of perfect alibi. The one person, Jaspal Singh, says, I was investigating a narcotics trial, and narcotics accused he has picked up. He even produced the drugs in the court and got that man convicted. So he says, I could not have been part of the abduction or killing of Jaswant Singh because I was elsewhere. Another man presented an alibi that he had gone to Hemkund Sahib on those days from 5th onwards and returned on 8th. And therefore, he could never have been part of the police team which abducted him. Similarly, other police officers, the SSP says, I had my daughter's marriage in Chandigarh. I couldn't be here and directing the operation. But each one of the alibi, partly it is a good investigation work by the CBI officers and partly by providence, that each of the alibi fell flat. In fact, I remember Kulwant Singh, he was an old army officer, army Jawan, and who would be very non-communicative. He was actually convicted for 10 years for possession of opium. And his testimony begins, I am an opium addict. He started with such honesty that I am an opium addict and I got this habit in the army. But this case, I had left it long time back. This case was planted by these 2 officers. And we had no idea that he will testify in such a way which will see, because he recognized the officer. He said, I had seen Jaswant Singh Khalra in the police station. And this was not his testimony to the CBI. He, in fact, was to save his own life to the CBI. He did not give the complete details. And he would not contact us. We tried to say him what is he going to say. We had actually lost hope because the first witness, Kikkar Singh, who had actually seen Jaswant Singh Khalra, and he was an independent witness. He had himself been abducted. High Court has ordered warrant officer to recover him. He was recovered. He testified for the High Court and for the inquiry that in fact he was in illegal custody and he saw Jaswant Singh Khalra. And his sworn testimony was accepted by High Court. He was granted compensation. We thought we had a very strong witness, and he was the first witness. And surprisingly, he turned hostile. He, in spite of having a sworn testimony before that, he said, no, it's all false. I have not done anything. And that was a major setback. But Kulwant Singh compensated that. He came to the court and gave all the details, everything which is much more than even what the Kikkar Singh would have told. And that is how I say Kulwant Singh personality, Kulwant Singh age, Kulwant Singh way to make fool of the police officer, and even not disclosing complete details to CBI actually protected him. So nobody influenced him and he came straight to the court. He did not even contact us. He would not talk to us and finally gave the court a true details. So in this particular case, Kulwant Singh turned out to be a kind of ace, MasterCard who nobody knew. And Kikkar Singh, who we thought is the real person, turned out to be actually fake. And another twist came when the crime was such planned that even the first witness, Rajiv Singh, as it turned out to be that he was the eyewitness, he turned out to be actually a kind of Trojan horse. He diverted the whole thing. The first information he gave the police had no names, even though later he testified that he knew police officers. He subsequently troubled Kuldeep Singh so much that Kuldeep Singh was always a wreck. He got the wife separated. He did all kind of tricks to divert the investigation. In fact, he was the person who was telling Mrs. Khalra when she was the witness box, do not identify the officers. So when your own among the more prime witness is undermining the trial, you can imagine, and we had no suspicion at all. We thought he is the friend, he's a journalist, he's a true thing, and he's following up the case, and everybody believed him, and everybody told him everything. And yet he was the man who was subtly, in a very clever way, is twisting the testimony of witnesses, misinforming them, and in fact did everything possible to actually, if two police officers escaped, got acquittal, it's primarily his work. But still, in spite of all that, just like I said, just despite all these obstacles, somehow the trial proceeded and it ended in conviction. We had a judge who had a very bad reputation. We were being advised, you move against the judge, that he's not going to give you justice. He is not not honest. But we said nothing doing. We are leaving it to the gods. We are doing everything possible. The friends are there. And I remember that remarkable movement in the court, because initial days there was a lot of fear. The police officers had all in their uniform and power, and they had all security, and none of them was arrested. And they would flood the court, and they had all the top lawyers of the Patiala with them. So you can imagine 9 police officers with all the security, with all the 9 officers. On one side is a few friends of Khalra and the lawyer, and a small CBI lawyer who himself was so much terrified. He was not from Punjab. And he would see turban people and he would be very submissive. And the judge was really overawed by the atmosphere. And after a few hearings, I think it's Gurpej who got angry, because we were being treated as an accused. And he finally, with great emotion, told the judge that, would you treat them like criminals? Would you treat them like accused? And if you can't give us justice, don't waste our time. Because remember, if you can't give us, it's better that you give us justice. Otherwise, we'll have to take it ourselves. And when we take justice, it will not remain in them. It will go to the next generation. It was stated with such great emotion that it stunned the court, and it demoralized the police officers and the security. And thereafter, the trial at least followed the semblance of a trial. They behaved like accused, judge behaved like a judge, and we got getting started more hearing. So that is how it turns out. But I have to always pay tribute to the remarkable group of friends which Jaswant Singh Khalra had, and of course his family, that they did not miss a single hearing. I regret missing one hearing when Kikkar Singh was to testify. We had given his testimony to the CBI counsel. That one hearing, that testimony was never confronted him when he was in witness box. That was such a lapse in the prosecution. Subsequently, of course, corrected by Kulwant Singh. But this is how the trial went. It was always a battle of willpower. For each hearing used to be an event, because something or else would always happen. Either they will damage the car, or the witness will not arrive. But I must say that the CBI officer also did a lot of things, especially when he produced Kuldeep Singh. He took Kuldeep Singh one day before to his home and took him into his personal custody. Nobody knew we could not contact him, and we never knew whether he will ever appear. And suddenly the officers brings him directly to the court. And that's how the testimony started. So for each, we remember Kirpal Singh Randhawa, before he used to testify, he was arrested under the rape case, and we thought, my God, in rape case, who get bail and how will he testify in the whole case? Because he is an important witness. He recognized the first police officer. He resided near the Jaswant Singh Khalra's home, and he was a very natural witness. Fortunately, the judge believed us and he got bail, and therefore lived up to testify, and subsequently the trial commenced. So that is how almost till the end we had no hope. Till the end we did not believe that the justice will be done. And when finally the judge did not give them the life terms, gave them only 7 years, we were really disappointed. But fortunately, the High Court corrected the error, and the Supreme Court upheld it.
Yeah, just listening to you, and I think it's so important that you've again highlighted. This is something I remember from the very first time I ever met you and talked to you about the Khalra case, was that as much as this case highlights that, the anatomy of this case highlights impunity, this case also highlights Chardi Kala, persistence, and old school Punjabi yari, right? Jadi Jaswant Singh, the friends ne nabai, the family ne nabai hai, una de nephew ne nabai hai, right? That is so important and so heartening in this time when people often say, koi kisi da saka nahi, all of that. In the best of times, people don't come together. And this is something really important and something that speaks in the fact that you notice this and speak to this, just gives us some idea of where you get your strength from, Bansab, that there's somehow that you're able to keep that Chardi Kala spirit yourself. And I have to say, I'm quoting Paramjit Kaur Khalra here, that she had said to me, others came and went, but Rajvinder Bains struggled with us. I don't care to name which other lawyers sold out at which points. The times were such, the men behind the crimes were such, but he is his father's son, and he is a true champion of human rights. And I think that is just so true, even in how you're telling us this story about a witness and this, and what you're showing us is there was no certainty till the end. There was nothing in this for you, in the sense of the way people think about, this great professional achievement and this kind, you were fighting what was seen as this battle that many would have been satisfied that at least it was fought, theek hai, haar gaye, right? People would have still said chalo lad le, because that's the overwhelming sense of fatalism around these cases, and you really did persevere with Paramjit Kaur Khalra. So Navkiran, I want to turn to the fact that your mom's not here, auntie's not here today, but there is just so much, as Satnam was mentioning before, and as most of the people probably listening know, that we owe this case, and we owe in many ways the legacy that's alive today to her perseverance. And at the same time, you and Janmeet were growing up. You were going through the same usual challenges kids go through at 8 and 10 when you lost your father, and then forward. And you were going through these usual challenges in completely unusual circumstances. So can you share with us a little bit of your sense of where your mom gets her spirit from, or any other insight you can share with those of us who are just in complete awe, as we rightfully should be, of just the remarkable work she's done and the remarkable work you've done. You've not, the one response to trauma is turning away from things. Like, you both could have just grown up to be decent human beings and said, well, and we won't really have talk about human rights now. We've done, our family's done its due. But that's not the case. You're here today. So can you speak a little bit to that spirit, where it comes from?
I think, as my mom normally puts, like September 6th was a turning point for all of us. And if you talk to her, like where she gets all this, I would say she would be like, I was a student activist when I was going to college, but then I got married, and then I had kids, I had to work, and we could only survive with one activist in the house. So that was my father. So the other person had to go earn money. So she was working as an assistant librarian in Guru Nanak Dev University. So she was the one who was putting the food on the table. But 6 September to baad, I think that's when she realized how big of a thing her husband was working on. She kind of knew what's happening, because when we moved into the house, the Kabir Park house, my father made a speech during the welcoming ceremony that we had, an inauguration ceremony kind of a thing. He said there would be police officers. This is 1994 February. And he said that there would be cops coming out to look for me. If they ask you, anyone asks you about Jaswant Singh from the village Khalra, just guide them to my house. So he was very clear in February 1994, more than 1.5 years earlier, that what's going to happen in this house. But probably my mother didn't accompany him to all the families and everything, but she took over really fast and she took over really strong. On September 9th, she was there to go to the Supreme Court, file the petition. I think there was and the group of other human rights activists who just joined her together to give her guidance. There were times like for us to adapt to things. My nanny, she moved in with us because mummy had to mostly be away. She had to be either in Chandigarh, Patiala, or Delhi, depending on where the need is. But then for our schooling, it wasn't disrupted. There were offers, as Satnam ji mentioned. Initially, somebody came in and said that you should put them in hostels, like in some hill station, some school, so that they are away. And she made a decision. She said, no, I'm not going to be apart from my kids. मैं अपने बच्चे अपने तो दूर नहीं करने. And ਇਹ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਜਾਣਗੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਹ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ, ਉਵੇਂ ਹੀ ਜਾਣਗੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ. Nothing is going to change for them. And that's how it happened. We didn't even change our school vans, like auto ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ same ਹੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. So then she made a decision. January 1996 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, I believe it was January, Canada, the Prime Minister visited India, Delhi, and at that time we got to meet her. Like mummy and I went to meet him in Delhi, and they openly did offer us ki we are ready to move you out. They ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਾਰੀ family ਨੂੰ, and then she point blankly said nahi, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ, we have to take this cause up. So then it was kind of growing up, we kind of made a collective decision. She made it for us initially ਕਿ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੱਕ ਆਪਣਾ ਕੇਸ ਸਿਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਉਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੱਕ ਆਪਣੇ ਤਿੰਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਛੱਡੂਗਾ. That was kind of her message ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਭੱਜ ਗਏ. So it was the same message ਜੋ ਮੇਰੇ father ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ we have to stay back. ਤੇ I guess ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ family ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ there was so much activity going on in Kabir Park, because we would wake up ਜੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਗਏ ਆ ਤਾਂ that's the time spent in school, but ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਉਣਾ ਤਾਂ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, she would give us work to either note down their story, address ਜਾਂ date, ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਫੋਟੋਆਂ staple ਕਰ ਦੋ register ਤੇ. So we would be doing all that work with her. And I remember एक incident, it was really ਜਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮੈਮਰੀ ਚ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, it was still 97 I think or 98. ਉਦੋਂ ਅਡਵਾਨੀ ਨੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਸੀ, ਕੁਛ ਸੀਗਾ like ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ anniversary ਸੀਗੀ, and Khalra mission at that time said कि ਅਸੀਂ protest ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਉਸ time ਤੇ they picked up all the Khalra mission activists. ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ, we were only 3, ਮੇਰੀ ਨਾਨੀ ਜੀ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਘਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, so ਅਸੀਂ ਤਿੰਨੋਂ ਹੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਘਰੇ, and I think the police knocked at our door around like 3:34 a.m. and it was like ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ we don't know ਹੁਣ ਕੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ they came to pick her up. And she was due for one of her major surgeries in a couple of days. Almost she had to be in hospital at that time, but they took her. But at least at that time, we were given time for her to make calls to all the news reporters that she knew and other people, so that everybody is aware that she's being arrested at 4 a.m. And we were like just 2 of us were left home. So as soon as like 7 baje, few of our cousins came to our house, but that's one of the things that she kind of prepared us ki things can happen and you will have to handle it. So and then again in I think case de dauran she would go ਜਿਵੇਂ Bains sahab ne bhi kiya ki it was kind of all the friends and mummy and my cousin Rana, they would make sure they should be there at all the hearings, but they then had commitment to back to the families. They would come back the same night, ਪਟਿਆਲੇ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਂ ਚੰਡੀਗੜ੍ਹ ਤੋਂ, and then ਜਦੋਂ ਕੇਸ end ਤੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਦੋਂ fast track ਤੇ ਪਿਆ ਸੀ, the very next day again at 4 a.m. they would leave and go back to Patiala or anywhere. And ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਬਹੁਤ disappointed ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, they had the hearing and nothing happened. One of our neighbors who was paused to testify ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ at the very last moment, I think ਪਟਿਆਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੰਮੀ ਹੋਰੇ were informed ਕਿ he probably will turn hostile and he's going to backtrack ਜੋ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿਣੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੇ it was going to be a big problem ਤਾਂ ਕੁਛ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਪ ਬਚਾ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੈ and the next day ਮੰਮੀ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੇ they wanted to go to his house to plead ਕਿ please don't do this to your neighbor ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਸੀ ਹੁਣ ਮੁੱਕਰੋ ਨਾ but it was interesting ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਿਸ ਰਾਤ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ he fell off from a roof ਸ਼ਰਾਬ ਪੀ ਕੇ and then he couldn't get up and give ਗਵਾਹੀ to anything so ਉਹ I would say ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਨੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਆਪੇ ਹੀ ਰੱਖ ਲਿਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿੰਨਤਾਂ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਪਈਆਂ ਉਸ ਨੇਬਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੇਸ ਨੂੰ ਖਰਾਬ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ but anyhow ਜਦੋਂ ਕੇਸ ਖਤਮ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੰਮੀ ਨੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਲੜਾ ਕੇਸ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ she worked in the grassroots with the families even right now ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ assurance ਦੇਣੀ ਆ I don't know about ਸਤਨਾਮ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ ਹੋਰੇ ਪਰ there were few organizations ਜਦੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ documentation ਕਰਨ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਉਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੱਕ ਕੁਝ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੱਕ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬੀਬੀ ਪਰਮਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਨੇ ਭੇਜਿਆ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਲਓ so ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ bridge she became ਕਿ families would need her assurance ki yes you should talk to this organization or this lawyer or not they I guess that's something she carried over and then her commitment ki a case sirf te sirf ਕੋਟਾਂ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੜਨਾ a case we have to take out to the kacheri so last year 2019 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ election ਲੜੀ ਹੈ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ covered it really well but ਉਹਦਾ ਮਕਸਦ ਇਹੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਖਾਲੜਾ ਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਲੋ ਰੋਲ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇਹ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜੋ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੀ they are not talking about it so that kind of came on to her ki it's her responsibility that she has to put it out again no matter ki hona hai harna jitna we already knew ki sade resources inne nahi hege ki we and neither are we political people but we wanted the issue to be there we wanted the entire elections to be focused on this issue and I think she was successful in getting that so she is committed to the cause and she took over really well I would say and there were so many other people who supported her guided her through all this
Thank you, Navkiran. It's extraordinary. It's clear, listening to you, how much inspiration parents pass on to their children. But I want to also acknowledge that it works both ways. I think children keep that inspiration and light alive in their parents. And I just, Janmeet, your brother is not able to be here on the panel today, but I want to read a little excerpt that your mom shared and that I wrote up, which just shows that resolve. And she shared it as a number of stories that she shared about how both her children and seeing that Chardi Kala spirit in them, even sometimes when she was feeling very heavy, how it reinforced the fight she was fighting. So she said, again, bilkul jo tu hune kya si, that's wahi gal kar rahe si ki Paramatma aap bal buddhi de denda. So this is, I wrote it in English, so I'm going to read it in English. One instance I remember so vividly. My son was all of 9 or 10 years. I would go to the gate to say bye-bye to him as he climbed into his auto rickshaw to school. And I would tell him every day to take care, to not talk to anyone who might approach him about anything, because those days people were trying to scare me a lot. He had even told us to withdraw kids from school. But this day, Janmeet looks at me very determined. Don't you worry, Mummy, the entire panth is with us. And she says, I stopped a couple of seconds and I nodded and I finally said, yes, the entire Sikh nation is with us. And she said, Fir I main ardas kiti, right? Okay, may this be true. And I think that is just so extraordinary listening. I think Satnam Baji's point about the next generation will carry this forward even after our generation, if we keep this intergenerational dialogue and this inspiration alive. So I'm going to just pass on some audience questions because this ties into what I wanted to ask you about PDAP and the Punjab Documentation and Advocacy Project, Satnam. So you it feels like as we all now know, that Jaswant Singh Khalra got a very short amount of time to do extraordinary amount of work, but it was really all happened between mid 94, mid 95. And I see you picking up a lot of, as you described, where he left off, including being able to, after 1998, Punjab for the first time, driven by your efforts, saw a commission, a people's commission. And those who are listening understand that South Asia, unlike other parts of the world, doesn't have a mechanism, anywhere for mass crimes to be openly discussed, documented, any commissions or courts, unlike the Inter-American Commission, etc. And we know that 1998, which when the commission happened, could have only one session, one hearing session in Chandigarh. How the leading lawyers of even the High Court in Punjab and Haryana took up the charge to oppose the commission, and how also that commission was dedicated to the memory of Jaswant Singh Khalra. And now we fast forward to 2011, I believe, when you held, am I looking at the year correct? But can you tell us a little what it meant to bring survivor families together recently in the People's Commission and hearings that you organized, and just elaborate on how that spirit, you see that alive in survivor families today?
So I think you've nicely summarized what took place, that in countries like India, where the courts always perhaps don't function in the way that they should, there's this phenomena of people's commissions, people's tribunals. In Delhi, if you sort of go to any of these, sometimes they're on the environment, on Dalit rights, on caste discrimination. So these aren't new things. These have been going on for decades now, and often people like Bains will go there and give the perspective on what's happening in Punjab. So it's a collection of different academics, lawyers who come together to try and sort of create a quasi-judicial environment in which at least victims can come and depose and, you know, feel that they're a part of a process where someone's listening. And again, the tragedy for Punjab is that, you know, this is unheard of, that the court, the Punjab and Haryana High Court, had intervened in 1998 to say this ad hoc collective meeting, which doesn't have any judicial powers, doesn't have any legal powers, that we're going to stop them from even sitting in a gurdwara or a building that's not even a court, so that the victims can't even depose. And I think they had a very distinguished panel of eminent retired judges, Justice Suresh and Justice Kuldeep Singh and a few others, who, again, it took a lot of efforts by Bains and the activists at that time, just to even hear those testimonies. And the intervention, you know, by the Punjab and Haryana High Court was that even that wouldn't happen. So when we did our documentation work, one thing was, you know, vichar hoi si ki beda hun kariye ki kitab ਛਪਾ ਦਿਓ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਜ਼ਰੀਏ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵੰਡ ਦਿਓ. And we just thought it's not enough, and there should be something where all this collective effort, you know, by people such as Bains Saab, Sodhi Saab, who was also involved in the Khalra case. There were other lawyers and activists. So the idea was that we should put together some independent people's tribunal, which would hear the victim testimony. And this was in 2017. It was convened in Amritsar. And again, you know, when we were trying to organize it, we were wondering how many people would turn up. And same sort of response was, ਛੱਡੋ ਪੁਰਾਣੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਣਾ. And you know, ਲੋਕ ਅੱਕ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ, ਤੰਗ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਆ, ਬਹੁਤ ਲਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਲਾਏ ਆ over the years ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ. And we thought, ਚਲੋ ਸੱਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ, and let's see what happens. And you know, we were blown away. You know, there were 700 victim families, and in fact the format was that we had a panel of that sat of people that were from outside of Punjab. In fact, the only non-Punjabi on there was the only Punjabi who was on there was Bibi Paramjeet Kaur Khalra. And you know, parivar utte pahunche, and we were initially thinking that we'll have it as a court system, so that sawal jawab puche jange, we would present the case. But then we thought, we scrapped the idea actually, And because there were so many people that wanted to speak, but ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੰਦਰਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀਗੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਚਹਿਰੀ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕੀਤੀ। You know, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ 20-25 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਸੀਗਾ, even just giving them 5 minutes on the stage, you know, was valuable to them. So the idea changed, and we just allowed as many victims as possible to come onto the stage to express their feelings. It didn't even need to be in a legal way, but ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੋ, ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ। And you know, the overwhelming emotion that came out was that, you know, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਧੱਕਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਾਬਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਆ, there needs to be some accountability. And you know, it was really from that again, ਅਸੀਂ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕੀਤੇ, we discussed with Bains and with Colin Gonsalves, who had taken up the cases in the Supreme Court. be ਇਹਦਾ ਕੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ? You know, documentation bhi hegi. In fact, what Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra had shown was that, look, this is a powerful piece of information that the courts needs to investigate. And what we had now was that there were a number of judgments from the Punjab and Haryana High Court, the CBI court, and as well as Khalra's own case, that this nexus between Anpashati Lawaris Lash Bani kis tarah, it was a way in which these murderers would dispose of a dead body. Some very good judgments, and the whole thing had been proved through the Khalra litigation. But jad hun eh cheez tay ho gayi, be lash na den da karan ki siga, lash anpashati bani kis tarah, ਘਰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਸੀਗੇ, ਟੋਰਚਰ ਦੇ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ, ਉਹ ਲਾਸ਼ ਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਸਬੂਤ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਸੀ। ਬੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਬਤ ਕਰੀਏ? ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਾਬਤ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਦੀ ਪੋਸਟਮਾਰਟਮ ਸਹੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕੀਤੀ, you've taken pictures, it will demonstrate that this person was killed extrajudicially. So I think again it's extraordinary that you have to prove the whole case before filing, and that what was the effort. So you know, the drafting, the pleadings were, it was an open secret when Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra had approached the court. But you know, the judgments are there, the compensation orders from the NHRC are there, the Supreme Court judgment in the Jaswant Singh Khalra case is there, and all we've done is we've collected data from all of those other 22 districts or 17 districts to show that ekala patti tarantaran dargyana mandir tak seemed nahi raha. You know, this was a systematic, organized method of killing. It's happened throughout the Punjab, and the High Court, sorry, the Supreme Court and the NHRC has taken a completely blinkered approach in not opening up that inquiry. Again, we can criticize that the NHRC didn't actually even go beyond just giving compensation for illegal cremations, but this whole issue needs to be looked at. The victim families are willing to take the case forward. The evidence is there. The precedent has been set. So on the back of this independent people's tribunal, you know, it was felt that, look, if the want of the victims is still there, and we've been just guided by them in the process. Be Mata ji, Bapu ji, you know, Paji tusi ki chone a jinna de pra chukke gaye ya, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਗਏ ਆ, and ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਇਹੀ ਆ be ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਇਨਸਾਫ, ਇਹ ਦੱਸਣ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਬਣਿਆ, ਕਿੱਥੇ ਮਾਰੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਲਾਸ਼ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਬਣਿਆ, death certificate ਹਜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹੇ. You know, you heard some excerpts from the footage or the testimony that young children who are in their early 20s, you know, they can't even get the land registered to them. And in fact, during the IPT, you know, there was a lot of discussion. Bains sahab ne bhi suggest ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ be look, ਇੱਕ procedure ਹੈਗਾ ਕੋਰਟ ਵਿੱਚ, be ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ apply ਕਰਕੇ ਦੇਖੋ, the person, there's a presumption that after a certain number of years, if the person hasn't been heard of, the court should issue death certificate. So in fact, we took the advice, we filed the case, filed cases in 1 or 2 victim families cases. Those cases have been going on now for 3 years. You know, so this is ridiculous. Kinne victim individually court no approach karuge be sanu death certificate chahida. So the idea was then that, look, they still need these fundamental rights to be acknowledged. You know, it's not just be sanu ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤੇ be ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੇਸ ਚੱਲਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਮਿਲਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਪਰ ਉਹੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਹਜੇ ਖੜਾ ਆ ਭਾਈ ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਾਲੜਾ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਘੱਟੋ ਘੱਟ ਡੈਥ ਸਰਟੀਫਿਕੇਟ ਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਮੀਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਝਗੜੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਸਬਸਿਡੀ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਧਵਾ ਪੈਨਸ਼ਨ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣੋਂ ਰਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਬਗੈਰ ਡੈਥ ਸਰਟੀਫਿਕੇਟ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਕੀ So, and this could go on for another generation. When these kids have their kids, we have these horrible stories of young girls. And it's tragic to say, be shaheed parivaran cho bhi eho je case sanu labbe a be una de jehdi bachchi de tae chache a oh koshish karde be kudi de kol zameen nahi jani chahidi. And the kudi's mother may have got remarried somewhere else. She's ended up at her nanake, and there's about 4 cases, really tragic cases, that the girl has been completely cut out of her haq because she can't prove, and they take advantage of these things. So the situation in adi jehdi halat I can't even begin to describe on a human level. Bekinna takka loka na hoya. And how the tragedy is really very much there. As Banji Navkiran Kaur was saying, this is why it was so important for Bibi Khalra ji to stay in the Madan, because as she rightly said, sometimes, even going to victim families and saying, we're here to document your case, lokan ch inna dar khauf aje bhi hega be pata nahi inquiry karna hai police wale hai. During the election time, families would say bi jad election hundi a thode varge ithe aa jande a the swab job sanu puchde a. So picking up the telephone call and saying tusi sidhi bibi Paramjit Kaur Khala, and then watching that anxiety fall from their face, it's like magic. Even a team of lawyers couldn't do. So ਕਹਿਣ ਦਾ ਭਾਵ ਇਹ ਆ that on an individual level, there are so many cases that are still, as Bansab said, where people who'd filed writ petitions, some of those cases are pending. We filed a new case. There's CBI cases. Even if we wanted this to just disappear, even if the state wanted this to disappear, it won't. It will go on. And it just state ਕੋਈ ਮੈਚੁਰਿਟੀ ਦਿਖਾਵੇ ਬੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਸੁਲ੍ਹਾ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜ਼ਖਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਮਲਮ ਪੱਟੀ ਲਾਉਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ then it's very ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਮੌਕਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਮੇਰੇ ਸੋਚਣ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ with this petition that if you genuinely want to try and at least heal some of the wounds of Punjab ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਕੇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ orders ਪਾਸ ਕਰੋ ਕੋਈ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਬਿਠਾਓ ਜਿਹੜੀ unidentified unclaimed ਲਾਸ਼ਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ the state knows exactly who these people are.
Yes.
And you should take some steps.
There's actually a question from the audience. What is the status of that the CBI petition to disclose the sealed records from other crematoria? What's the status of that PDAP petition?
So in the Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra case, the CBI reports into how many cases they investigated. Bansab, I think, can probably give you more information on this. They were never disclosed to any of the litigants. In fact, we had to do guesswork in finding out how many CBI cases there were. So this is in relation to the mass cremations case, Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra case. In relation to the petition that we filed, we originally filed in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court heard the matter. And the first hearing, they said that the matter is related to Punjab, and they gave us liberty to withdraw the petition and refile in the Punjab and Haryana High Court. So we did that late last year, and the matter has been heard 2 or 3 occasions. The last time Bansab and I appeared in the High Court, a direction was given that the orders in the Khalra case, because we're saying that this litigation is parallel to what's already happened and these precedents have been set. So I think the AG was asked to produce some of the orders or the orders that the High Court had asked for. And but unfortunately, this was just before the COVID outbreak. And again, as Bansab will tell you, that the High Court now is adjourning a lot of the cases. So we've had a couple of dates now, but I don't think we'll hear anything substantive until the COVID situation normalizes. Well, that's my understanding anyway, that the court's taking up certain other cases. So we're not out of the woods in the sense that the court still has to admit the case formally. and issue notice. So we haven't reached that point yet. So that's the status at the moment with the PIL.
And I'm glad you mentioned the current status. We have COVID on one hand, and I'm going to turn to Bansab to talk about, despite COVID and despite things being adjourned in the courts, there is so much activity by the state in suppressing dissent and suppressing freedom of expression. So if I'd like to end on this question actually, at least from my part. Can you tell us a little bit of today's situation that's happening, even while there's supposedly, there's a pandemic and all of those procedures, all of those things, regular movement and everything should be curtailed. Yet we have people who are being taken into jails and taken into custody for very relatively small transgressions. Can you just explain a little of the current situation?
Before I do that, there is one unique aspect of Khalra trial.
Yes,
this
please.
was the only case. This was the only case in which evidence came that the orders to kill Khalra was issued by KPS Gill, Director General of Police. This was a solitary case in our jurisprudence where the commander is named by a witness. And in fact, why he did not face trial was that for good reason his name came at the end. We did not want the other officers to escape. At the moment trial end, we moved the High Court, saying the CBI should now present the charge sheet against KPS Gill. Unfortunately, while the case was pending for many, many years, it was filed in 2006. In 2014, the key witness, Kuldeep Singh, who had given this testimony, that the final orders came from KPS Gill, died. And that is how our serious attempt to bring KPS Gill into the accused category and in the our opportunity, that's how it ended. And now anyway, Ms. KPS Gill has joined everybody else. The present situation, you see, every other activity is stopped. But one activity which is not stopping Punjab is filing false cases and suppress the people. The last I heard was that a young man was arrested from Golden Temple, Ardas ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਉਹਨੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਣੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਸਕਸੈਸਫੁਲ ਹੋਵੇ ਉਸ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ praying to God has been criminalized and ਉਹਨੂੰ ਫੜ ਲਿਆ ਅੰਦਰ unlawful activities prevention act ਪਿਛਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ 1.5-2 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਫੜੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੋਈ ਬੁੱਕ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੋਈ WhatsApp ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੋਈ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ 올ਡ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ 92 ਦੀਆਂ 93 ਦੀਆਂ 94 ਦੀਆਂ ਕੋਈ ਲਾਭ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਕੋਈ ਪੋਸਟਰ ਹੈ ਕੋਈ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਾਬਾਦ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਮਰ ਕੈਦ ਤੱਕ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ 3 ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦਾ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਕੋਲ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਸੀ ਦੇਸ਼ ਭਗਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਭਾਈ ਰਣਧੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਡਾਇਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਇੰਸਪੀਰੇਸ਼ਨਲ ਹੈ 16 ਸਾਲ ਜਿਸ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਲਈ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਤਜਰਬਾ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖ ਵੀ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਜੇ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਗੱਲ ਕੀ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਜੱਜ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਹੈ so look at the ignorance look at the intolerance look at the how do you alienate young men on such frivolous things and this is happening now it is actually a new dimension of fake encounter now you are making fake cases earlier they used to kill under fake encounters now on frivolous cases they are putting young men because there is actually nobody taking up arms in Punjab today but therefore the whole stress is on planting such kind of cases that somebody is sharing WhatsApp, somebody is Facebook, and that is how now that's the next challenge for the human rights defenders, how to defend people when even to express, because ultimately crime is when you do something. Holding an idea that I want to create a Khalistan is no offense. Holding an idea I want to commit murder is no offense. So therefore, even preparation of murder is not an offense. It's only when you take the first step for the crime, then the crime starts. But somehow, holding an opinion, expressing an opinion has become punishable in Punjab. And that's this is the latest challenge to any lawyer or court system or human rights defenders.
Well, thank you for your sustained work in an environment that seems so farcical and would be funny if it weren't real, right? Like some of this is it's just extraordinary that you continue to persevere. And the least of the work you've probably done this week is come and talk to us, but at the same time, it's meant the most and for a lot of us, because just hearing directly from you and hearing directly from Satnam Baji has meant a lot. And Navkiran, there's obviously no words, I think, to express the inspiration she is for so many women and men in our community. So Minno, we're going to turn to Fremont Gurdwara in California for a Samapti. There's going to be a Samapti and Ardas today, and we are all, so please stay on for that. I just want to say from my end that, this reminds me, this panel and your bravery and your emotion reminds me of that famous Mehboob poem from 1986, right? Muh jod samana kaume meet sakega tenu, apni pat pehchan lave je lad mahi da fadke. Right? Endless challenges will not be successful in our erasure if only we claim our honor and if only we clutch on to the Almighty. So thank you for sharing your honorable work with us, and may we all follow the light of Jaswant Singh Khalra and be lights for others. Thank you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru